So hi everyone, today we'll talk about the course called World Literatures in Modern Times. So this course was phenomenal in that it introduced a very new angle into literary studies. So specifically, it investigated the interrelation between literature and science. So today we'll discuss the question, can fiction writers foresee things earlier than scientists? So in 2012, a neuroscientist, Quiroga, published a book called Borges and Memory. So Quiroga studies the workings of the brain, so in particular how memory works. And he was astonished that one of his research findings was already written in a story by Borges 50 years earlier. So this story is called Funes the Memorious. So Funes is a 21-year-old peasant from Uruguay who remembers everything after falling off a horse and hitting his head. And many years later, neuropsychologist Luria published his study on a real subject, S. Coincidentally, S also could remember everything. So here I'll show you more similarities between Funes and S. So Borges writes, Funes knew by heart the forms of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882. These memories were not simple ones. Each visual image was linked to muscular sensations, thermal sensations, etc. So Borges tries to identify the mechanism of his character's remarkable memory, but he couldn't go deep due to a lack of empirical evidence. So we can say the way Funes remembers scenes is supernatural. And Luria writes, S could memorize long sequences of words. Each word could spark an image that he would distribute along a parse he had devised in his mind. He would use a famous street in Moscow. S would then stroll along that street in his mind, visualizing all the elements, the words he had left there. So S trains his memory based on synesthesia, which is scientifically proven. And for both Borges and Luria, remembering everything can be a curse. So Borges writes, Funes had effortlessly learned English, French, Portuguese, Latin. I suspect, however, that he was not very capable of thinking. Again, Borges does not elaborate on the reasons why Funes was not good at thinking. On the other hand, we can find a detailed and convincing explanation in Luria's finding. So Luria writes, S could not study because these unwanted associations made him lose track of what he was reading. Poetry, in particular, demands a figurative understanding, the ability to grasp the ideas suggested by words, so as to go beyond their literal meaning. S considered poetry to be a nightmare. So now we can conclude Funes and S share many similarities. You might think that Borges was inspired by the findings of Luria, but this was not the case. The character of Funes was written in 1942, but the finding about S was not published until 1968. So just as Quiroga writes, I cannot help noticing the uncanny lucidity with which Borges treats a topic as complex as memory in the context of a short story. He said this because memory works is arguably one of the most complex and elusive mysteries of science. So I think Borges not only treats memory mechanism lucidly but also poetically. He writes, it was very difficult for Funes to sleep. To sleep is to turn one's mind from the world. Funes, lying on his back on his cot in the shadows, could imagine every molding in the sharply defined houses surrounding him. So Borges himself had trouble in sleeping, and this story can be seen a long metaphor of insomnia. And finally, I'll show you my favorite part of the story, which is a bit melancholy. Funes was a solitary and lucid spectator of a multiform, instantaneous, and almost intolerably precise world. Babylon, London, and New York have overwhelmed with their ferocious splendor the imaginations of men. No one in their populous towers or their urgent avenues has felt the heat and pressure of a reality as indefatigable as that which day and night converged upon the hapless Funes in his poor South American suburb. So this part explains why some people think the story is a lament on the unfulfilled potential of a prodigy who lives and dies in obscurity. So if we go back to the earlier question, can fiction writers foresee things earlier than the scientists? I would say yes, they probably can, though not that logical and scientific. But it is exactly the imaginativeness and literariness that distinguish fiction from scientific researches, and that is how our curiosity is aroused. So that's all for today. Thank you.